So this seemed to be like a really popular topic to pick, so I'm excited about this. We're going to talk about habits. Specifically, we're going to talk about self-control in terms of creating habits or eliminating habits. Sometimes they're negative, sometimes they're positive. So I love some e-cards, so there'll be plenty of humor throughout this presentation. So, are you a good habit or a bad habit? And the dictionary defines a habit as a usual way of behaving, something that a person does often, regularly, in a repeated way. And Charles Duhigg in The Power of Habit talks about the habit loop and how you get cues that elicit behavioral responses and that in the end up rewarding your brain. So if, for example, something triggers you to light up a cigarette, obviously the nicotine is the reward that you get there. He talks about ways of creating new habits and breaking habits, and one of the tips that we'll discuss later is actually going on vacation, because it gets you out of your usual set of cues and you can more easily break bad habits or start to establish habits in that new kind of blank slate environment. And willpower. Willpower is kind of more of a folksy term, not technically a scientific psychology term, but it has actually been proven to be a real concept in terms of how we create habits and our self-control. And as I said here, they're the superpowers of habit change. So they're the things that we're looking at when deciding to create new habits or destroy negative old habits. There we go. Okay, so why do we care about willpower? Roy Baumeister, who we'll talk about more, he's one of the 3 studies that I'm going to cover over, really put it quite effectively when he said that there's a practical significance to it. Everything we do comes from willpower and self-control. So things like addiction, overeating, crime, domestic violence, STDs, prejudice, debt, unwanted pregnancy, which I honestly think falls under STDs, but I think there's some debate on that. Educational failure, underperformance at school and work, lack of savings, all of these things are expressions of our willpower and self-control or lack thereof. And since scientists have figured out that habits and self-control, the things that we do and how successful we are, come from intelligence and then our ability to control and have self-control and willpower. And since intelligence isn't something that we've been able to consistently increase and keep at a higher level, that self-control and being able to tweak that side of things is really our only hope in terms of making effective, long-lasting changes. So, cookies or radishes? So, Baumeister and friends did a study where they basically tested the self-control of a group of subjects by baking fresh cookies and having one group indulge in the cookies and another group eat radishes and resist the temptation of cookies. So after they did this, they gave them a puzzle. And what I've learned is that psychologists can be real bastards. The puzzles sometimes don't have solutions. So they're just testing the amount of time you'll spend on a puzzle before you give up. The people who indulged spent 20 minutes on average on the puzzle, and the people who ate radishes spent 8 before giving up. And so they concluded that something interesting happens called ego depletion. And they chose this term. It comes from Freudian theories about ego and the combination of energy and the processes involving energy. And so basically your self-control and your willpower are a finite resource. And if you use it in one area, it can lead to you not having enough to make better decisions in other areas. So they found that when you exert self-control, you're more likely to make impulsive decisions and bad decisions afterwards if it's been depleted. They also did some brain scans, because that's pretty awesome, and found that glucose plays a huge role here. So that's your brain food. And if you're depleted in glucose, you're more likely to, again, make bad decisions and lack the self-control and willpower to react how you would prefer to rather than how you're inclined to. Let's see. They also talked about that when you are mindful in one area, like let's say for example you decide that you want to floss your teeth more regularly, and you start practicing this as a habit and being consistent about it, that actually builds up your ability to have more self-control and in other areas. So then maybe it makes it easier for you to quit smoking or avoid sweets or something like that. So there are changes in one area can develop changes in others as well. So self-control is frequently talked about as a muscle, so it can be fatigued and overworked, but it can also be built up over time. So, so you can work on it, and Muravin and Oten and Chang did a couple of studies. One was short-term over 2 weeks, and one was longer-term over 2 months. And they had people doing some sort of self-control exerting activity. For example, the 2-week study had people avoid sweets, and they found that those people had an easier time quitting smoking after that. So exerting self-control in one area helped them build up their self-control and willpower muscle and exert self-control in other areas. The 2-month study by Oten and Chang, they looked at people doing a workout consistently, so they exercise consistently. And at the end of the study, they found that people reported that they were more likely to get enough sleep, they were eating healthier, drinking less alcohol, their study habits had improved, their financial decisions had improved, and they were better able to save and budget and plan accordingly. And all of this because they had exerted self-control in one area that I think a lot of people struggle with, which is the exercise side of things, and it had an overall very positive effect in a number of things that were not directly related to the study as well. Okay, Chubby Bunny, this is one of my favorites. Walter Mischel did an experiment involving marshmallows, and he sat down pre-K, kindergarten, and elementary age school kids, and the experimenter would give them a marshmallow and say, you can have this marshmallow, but I need to leave. And if you can wait till I come back, you can have 2 marshmallows. If you can't wait, just ring this bell, and I will come back, and you can eat your 1 marshmallow, but you don't get the second one. And what they found was that there were kids who just couldn't stand it. They immediately ate the marshmallow. But there were other kids who used like self-talk techniques and talked themselves out of eating the marshmallow by saying it was bad, or a witch was going to cast a spell on them if they ate it right away and they couldn't do it. Or they distracted themselves and walked around the room and stayed away from the marshmallow and managed to do just fine. Had their second marshmallow when the experimenter came back. But the best part of the study is they actually followed these kids into their teens and then later as adults. So it's been about 40 years that they've looked at the same group of test subjects. And what they found was that the people who, as children, were better able to delay gratification and wait for the second marshmallow were more successful in jobs, scored higher on SAT scores. As children, their parents reported that they were better able to manage stress. They were less distracted at times that they needed to concentrate on something. They tended to have less issues with crime and addiction as adults as well, and had better careers and were more satisfied. Another one where they used brain scans and actually figured out that the areas of the brain concerned with impulses and more rational decision making played a huge difference. The people who couldn't, as children, delay gratification the prefrontal cortex didn't work quite as well as the people who were able to delay gratification. So some of that comes down to just what you're born with, but some of it is a willpower exercise, and you can build up that self-control and train yourself into that delayed gratification and the ability to change those habits. And I think SciBlog is one of our favorite resources for kind of pop psychology and interesting things. And they talked about how delayed gratification actually, you enjoy the activity that you've delayed more if you've had that time delay in between. So that's when we exercise regularly. In fact, today is our end of delayed gratification. It's our junk food day. So the whole week we wait, and then it's just so much better. So, basic study takeaways. So, SciBlog, like I mentioned, one of my favorite places to check out, they actually had a great list of 10 things to keep in mind when you are working on changing habits. So, 1, respect low ego. The fact that ego can be depleted in that you know that this is going to cause an issue with reacting impulsively and not being able to manage your impulses and behavior is definitely something to keep in mind. There's not a specific feeling or emotion associated with low ego or depleted ego, but it's been described as all of life gets the volume turned up on it, so everything is more irritating to you or louder or more tempting. Pre-commit, so if you're going to a party, deciding in advance how much you'll drink, or if you'll eat dessert or whatever it is that you're doing, and kind of talk yourself into saying, how will I react in this scenario? Use rewards. So give yourself a goal and give yourself rewards along the way, whether it's food or a massage or whatever it is that's going to motivate you towards working on that goal. And penalties. And actually, Will and I do this a lot. So I'm trying to wake up earlier in the morning. And any morning that I don't wake up, I put a tally on a dry erase board that gives him a 30-minute massage. I hate giving massages. This is a really huge penalty for me to be committing. In 2 days, I've committed an hour to an activity that I really don't enjoy doing. So it works as a pretty good deterrent.
But have you not set up an incentive system where Will is intentionally going to try to sabotage you?
He's pretty dead asleep.
That willpower.
Right. Yeah, he's pretty dead asleep in the morning. So he's not very good at intentionally sabotaging. But sometimes it's just so cold outside the covers. So cold. Fight the unconscious. So even mere suggestions of temptation. Food. We discussed this just yesterday. Food, there are so many subconscious foods for cue and so many social cues for food that it's very difficult to make a habit change if you're used to just eating whatever, whenever, and getting into social situations where there's cookies and candy and everything's out all the time and you're trying to stay away from it. So it can be a little bit of a challenge. And other studies have found where if workers keep candy inside a desk drawer, they're less likely to indulge than if they keep a candy bowl on their desk. Sometimes these habit loops get us just grabbing into whatever bowl and putting it in our mouth. So adjust expectations. So they talk about it's okay to lie to yourself and be overly optimistic. As long as you're staying within the realm of reality, you're really never going to sprout wings and fly, but you can probably save enough money and have a good savings goal to go on vacation and fly instead of driving. So as long as your expectations are relatively realistic, it's okay to be overly optimistic about your ability to succeed. It'll help drive you towards your goal. And adjusting your values. So you want to value what you're working towards, and you want to really view in a negative light any sort of temptation or anything that's going to drive you away from what you're doing. So just like the kids kind of use self-talk to talk about how I didn't really want this marshmallow, or this witch is going to put a curse on me if I eat this marshmallow. You can do the same thing basically to yourself. And I've done this time and time again. I'm I don't really want that piece of chocolate. It's going to make me feel terrible. My sugar's going to spike, even though the rest of me was you really want this piece of chocolate. It's going to be amazing. So adjusting those values, how much you value something, especially compared to your goal, is a good way to go in terms of creating new habits. Use your heart. So emotions can help you meet your goals. So visualizing, how you'll feel at the end when you've met your goal, talking to others about how excited you are about your goal. It can be anything. People set goals to lose weight or save more money, or change jobs. I set a daily goal to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's not always easy, but we like to think that we can succeed at these things, and it feels good to do that. Self-affirmation. Stuart Smalley, right? SNL. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. It works. Especially if it's something that you genuinely feel about yourself. Using self-affirmation can really help to drive you towards that self-control and the ability to create those new good habits that you want, or break the old bad ones. And then some tips that I've pulled from looking at the different studies. So this kind of just ties everything together. Accountability is a big one. A lot of success derived from programs like Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig and things like that come from the fact that you have this community of people who are like you, who are striving towards the same goal, and who want to succeed and want to see you succeed as well. So having someone that you can hold yourself accountable to works out great. So Will and I do this low carb diet together. at work, my manager and I work towards the same goals and hold each other accountable. Number 2, delegation. Anything that's a minor task, like surfing Facebook, checking email, booking your vacation online, doing things like that, anything you can delegate to other people that will help to avoid that ego depletion on things that aren't important and that can be very overwhelming, like going through multiple travel sites and trying to find the best deal. That's a good way to kind of preserve your willpower as well and dedicate that to other things that need work. Keeping it real. So you want to make sure that you have realistic expectations about what you can achieve. Like, I'm never going to be a supermodel ever because I'm 5'6" instead of 6'2". There are things about me that are never going to change. Can I be in better shape? Sure. So keep it as realistic as you can, but at the same time be optimistic and keep the glass half full. So no negative self-talk about what you're trying to achieve. Delayed gratification. Like we mentioned with the marshmallow study, the more you can do this, the more rewarding in the end the activity is for you. And again, this goes across and will help you develop habits in other areas. So 2 at a time. Let me grab my notes here. There we go. Okay, so you want to give yourself a 2-week challenge each time. So, if you're looking to drink more water, use that as the one thing that you're working on and work on it for 2 weeks, and then add something else that you want to work on. And it'll make it easier as you're building that self-control and willpower muscle. And so that's where the 1 at a time starts, and that's only pick one thing at a time. It's very draining. And some people really thrive on stress. And so you're going to be able to pick 2 or 3 things that you want to balance at once. But if you get stressed out pretty easily, you might just want to go with one thing at a time and slowly work on it a little bit at a time. So anytime that you are practicing mindfulness and being mindful about the way you're eating or the way you're driving, any of these things, it really uses that self-control muscle, because a lot of the things that we do when we form habits, the thinking goes from the prefrontal cortex to an automated system in your brain where you're not really thinking about it, which is, raise your hand if you've driven home from work and we were like, how did I get here? Tons of times. Because you tend to take the same routes, you develop these habits, you get on autopilot because it's easy, and then your brain can use the real thinking power to do other more complicated things. Will I regret this in the morning? So ask yourself if it's going to be worth it. Whatever habit you're trying to do. Sometimes people get into things that are, fashionable, like Bikram yoga or hot yoga, that aren't necessarily going to be worthwhile, or aren't necessarily going to be worthwhile to you. Not everything's for everyone. So make sure that whatever you're committing to is something that you really want to spend time on, because time is your non-renewable resource. It's something you can't get back and you can't get more of. It's tempting, but no. So you want to make sure that any sort of temptations that are easy for you to access, you stay away from as much as possible. So we have junk food in the house, but it stays on a really high shelf. You have to make a considerable conscious effort to reach for a box of cookies. I have to get a stool so that stuff doesn't come tumbling down on me. So it's much easier to avoid that temptation because there's so many extra steps there. And when you really think about it and you think about why you're doing it as opposed to how you're doing it, it gets you a little bit further away from that and more towards your goals. Junk food is it's a big one for us. So Tahiti, I hear it's a magical place. So who watches Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Come on. I know you do because we watch it together. So taking a vacation, like I mentioned in the beginning, that's a wonderful way to break bad habits because you're getting out of all of your usual cues, or start developing new habits. So I was at a presentation last month, and it was a bunch of residents at Ball Memorial Hospital. And surprisingly, none of them flossed. Everybody wanted to be better at flossing. That was the big thing. So if you go on vacation, start your flossing then. You get out of your usual habits, and you're probably a little bit more energized too. And it's just a little easier. Or quitting smoking. That was one of the things in the studies that they found. If you can go on vacation, you get away from all your typical triggers, and it's much, much easier. So, Suggested reading. So these are some of the kind of pop psychology books that probably doctors would kind of thumb their nose at, but I really enjoyed that talk about basically how people behave and what makes them tick. Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, and he's got a few talks on TED as well that are really great. He talks about, he's a behavioral economist and talks about why it is people do what they do and how, despite the fact that economics is a very rational field of study, it doesn't really apply in the real world because people don't think that way. We can't rationalize some costs. We really dig into those and own them. Change or Die is another excellent one, especially in terms of habits and things, and it discusses why people sometimes don't make the necessary changes, even though it is a matter of life and death. And some of that is a matter of the importance of the activity versus the time. So actually Dan Ariely has a talk where he talks about he had hepatitis C and was using interferon as a treatment, which made him very, very sick. And he was the only one in his group that actually did the treatment from start to finish entirely. And he had set up for himself, he talked about, he would rent a couple movies he really wanted to see, get him ready, give himself the injection, and get all of his supplies ready and everything, and then watch the movie. And that was the way he got himself to do this activity, which in the short term was very stressful because you had all these negative side effects that were coming from the medication. But in the long term, he really kind of needed that liver. But the negative side effects right now are what most people fixated on and weren't able to complete the treatment appropriately. Nudge is a great book about how small changes in a pathway can really lead to great results. So it's kind of the 80-20 principle, and it's going to be about 20% of your effort is going to give you 80% of your results there. They talk about, in schools, access to healthier food. If you make the healthier food more accessible, so it's easier to reach, kids will grab that before they grab junk food. Saving for Tomorrow, which always makes me think of Stephen Colbert and his campaign. Basically committing a large portion of your next raise towards your 401k where it automatically gets moved. So you're bringing home the same amount home and you're fine because you've been fine all along, but you're putting a larger amount away into savings for tomorrow without feeling it at all, and automating these processes. And automation, I mean, if you've ever had an automated subscription, you know how much time you can waste before you actually cancel it. Sometimes it's months because it just happens and you don't see it, especially if it's on a credit card, it's in the background. That $10 or $20 gets paid with the hundreds of other dollars that you've spent, and it's just very easy to overlook. Hey, AT&T gave me a great discount, okay? So I wasn't in any hurry to cancel the service. It was going to be fine.
We had other internet service.
Yes, but it only cost me $7 last month, so it's fine. So those are just a few books that that I recommend as further reading for habits and change formation. And thank you. Questions, answers?
So two things you kind of already hit on that I'm just bringing up because they're what I've heard of with habits. One is social circles. So if you're trying to start a new habit and you can get some peer pressure from people within your social network, that makes it more likely to succeed. And then another would be, you talked about the vacation as a time to give yourself a blank slate. I've also read like major life events.
Yes.
Whether it's like moving to a new place or having a child. Advertisers and lots of third parties are very keen on, like if you're a Target, for example, you're very keen to figure out, oh, is this girl pregnant because we can market all these different products to her. She's very apt to form lots of new habits at this time. Yeah,
that was one of the big things that I read. Target is really acutely aware of the way your shopping habits change. So they're looking at like women who buy vitamins or unscented lotion. And there's actually a story about a gentleman who's very upset when Target started advertising all these baby things to his 16-year-old daughter, and called them and was very vocal about, he was like, are you trying to get her to, to become pregnant with all of these advertisements and freebies and things? And he had to call back and apologize because Target knew before he did that she was pregnant. And that's what they found. They found that having a baby is one of the biggest uproots in your life. everything that you're doing is going to be changing all of your habits. And so it's a great time for them to come in and be your new habit that's going to be much longer term, because hopefully you're going to hang on to your kid for a while. So yeah, they are uniquely positioned to do that, advertisers in general. It is, it's a little creepy to get the Target stuff for babies. I'm like, I swear I bought the diapers for a friend. Please stop. So, very good. Causes you to be more mindful about what you're actually doing, can help build up that self-control and the ability to translate that into other areas. But yeah, also Andrew, I know you talked about the social aspect of it, and there are websites like Stick, different places where you can like place bets and compete against people and group together for different things that you're doing. A lot of people use those for like if they want to get into a consistent workout routine, and you know, you'll bet money, or some people they'll donate money to a charity that they hate. So for example, if you don't wake up in the morning on time, we give like $5 to insert name of charity here. Or there's actually like one of Dan Ariely's talks, there's like a clock that does that automatically for you. You hit the snooze button and it gives like $5. I'm not sure if it's on the market yet or not, but that's a little dangerous.
Your cell phone app, what is that?
I'm sure you could. So there are some things like that. And I think another one was like colonoscopies. People hate colonoscopies. They don't want to go for them. Nobody wakes up and is like, it's a beautiful day for a colonoscopy. So I think there have been like doctor's offices who say, well, you write us a check for like $500 or $300. We're going to hold on to it. If you show up, you get your money back. If you don't show up, you don't get your money back. And it's a bit more of an incentive if you got $500 on the line for this procedure that you're hopefully mosely not conscious for, but as Will's mom has found, that's not always the case, unfortunately. But it's one of those things, and Nudge talks a lot about that, like how there are small pushes towards better habits and better behaviors. And when I was visiting with the group of residents at Ball, they talked about like behavior is such a huge part of whether patients comply with the procedures they're supposed to be doing and whether their health improves. Even though like our genetics are basically the largest determinant of how our life is going to be in terms of health, but the behavior aspect of it, whether you're going to, take your insulin every day, whether you're going to change, your sleep habits, or whether you're going to quit smoking or using drugs or drinking alcohol as much, things like that, they're huge game changers. But how do you get people to comply with these things is always a big question. And socioeconomic status plays a huge role in it. So being poor makes you a worse decision maker. You're constantly stressed out. Your ego's constantly depleted on little things, because you have to make every decision every day. You're living day to day and paycheck to paycheck. So that makes it a lot more difficult to make good decisions, and you get into a really bad habit loop at that point where you don't have the resources, but you also don't have the mental self-control left to do anything to change that for the better.
So one thing that you were hitting on here that didn't actually come out explicitly say, and that is you want to set yourself up to succeed, right? So setting up good habits through putting the bad stuff farther away. You want to say, well, I'm going to take this path to work because I know that I'm not going to be able to stop at Burger King when I go this way.
But it's right next door.
So the point being is that, and this is one of Dan's big things, is know what you are rational about and avoid those.
Mm-hmm. Avoiding the temptation.
Yeah, and then the last thing is that you want to use positive internal self-talk, and it's amazing how negative we talk to ourselves. Mm-hmm. She used the double negative just a little while ago, and that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. Instead of just saying the positive, sometimes it's difficult to look at it from the positive, like I'm hungry right now. Well, rather than saying I'm not hungry right now about eating a snack food or whatever, you would come back and say my stomach is full, I feel satiated. So you actually have to change that around, because every time that you do that negative, you're actually taking a little bit away from that muscle, that ego depletion.
So I have just an observation. So I will say that I'm less bought into the ego depletion sort of notion of it like a muscle. And more, because I look at extremely successful, driven people, and many of them have this dark, twisted part of them, or some of them do, right? Ben Franklin was terrible. Winston Churchill, all these guys, right? You look. So, but I think what it's about, and I think a lot of what I agree with, is about you got to kind of look internally and figure. You almost have to hack your own psyche, right? You need to say, no, here's why I'm successful here. And if I want to change this here, how do I apply it here? That may mean, okay, I'm not going to go the Burger King route. Or it may mean I'm going to think about my mom every time I, right? And to do that intentionally, I think, is a challenge. But I think that, to me, that's almost any, and then it becomes you're just doing it. You know, you're no longer trying, you know, there is no try, there's only do. That you kind of just flip a switch and you're in that mode once you've done that hack. I know that's not very scientific or specific, but I think that works for me.
It's going to depend on what your triggers are, and
what
your temptations
you gotta know
are,
what
and how
those
you
are,
can,
right?
and what your rewards are, and all of those things, and what habits you're trying to change. I mean, if you're just trying to develop good habits versus breaking bad habits, well, yeah, so you skip flossing once or twice a week, it's not going to kill you, but you shoot up heroin again, and it could. So it kind of depends on how the weight of the activity you're trying to do too. But I agree. I found I tend to schedule myself for a lot of things, and I tend to procrastinate. But I'm very stress driven. Like having a day where I'm super busy, that's what keeps me going. Having a day that's totally like relaxed and I need to know like hour by hour what I'm doing. And if I only have 30 minutes to clean, then that's more like I'll get more done and do a better job than if I have the whole day and eventually I'll put it off and still do it in only 30 minutes, But now I've dreaded it the whole day. So kind of knowing what makes you tick.
Yeah, I think that works perfectly. But there are other people that would be a disaster, right? If I have to be regimented, I'm going to stress me out and I end up doing nothing, right? So I think it's about kind of knowing yourself and then figuring out which of these techniques to apply in context.
Yeah.
But that's Parkinson's law, where I mean, if you give yourself a week
it's gonna
clean
take
up
a
a
week.
room, it's going to take a week. If you give yourself 30 minutes, then
to be realistic about that too, if I gave myself 30 minutes to say go through all of this information and like put this presentation together, never gonna happen. But yeah, probably about 80% of the time it does apply exactly like that. I try to remind my teammates at the office about that, and like, sure, we have an extra month, but we're probably just going to procrastinate it till the end, so let's get this project done now.
Yeah, the short goals to get to the bigger goal.
Yeah, and really the hardest thing is getting started. Do it once, and then you've done it once, and now it's much, much easier to keep something going. And that's, I always start and I write an outline. If I can write an outline, I feel like I've started whatever my project or blog post or whatever it is, and then it's so much easier to keep going because now I've done the hardest part.
There's something about letting yourself be in the moment too, because if you're worrying about it and thinking it through, you're doing all this stuff in your head, that means you're not doing it, right? But if you could set up conditions so that you're just doing it, whether that means I'm just taking this route or it means I know on my schedule you're sort of in the moment just doing it, not worrying about it or trying to talk yourself into, you're almost avoiding the self-talk, you're just doing. Maybe the self-talk can reinforce the good stuff.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
It was like the movie, what you were talking about, the guy with the movie and things. Because if I'm really hungry during the day, if I get really into my work, then hours can go by. And then I'll suddenly go, man, I'm really hungry. I was really hungry a long time ago, but I didn't act on it. But I got so busy that I didn't think about it. So if you can...
when I do that.
You can't just eat breakfast.
Yeah.
You can't.
6 eggs for breakfast.
That's called intermittent fasting. If you just eat breakfast, that's a different habit. But
It's not on purpose, though.
yeah. Well, like I say, you can create distractions.
Programming does too.
Yeah, it does. It's a zone thing. So.
A lot of my work actually revolves around like having food with other people or having lunch meetings or
That'd be
coffee or
dangerous.
whatever. So I'm very food driven. I'm like, when's my next meal? I also get hangry. So I have to know where my next meal is coming from or it's not pretty. Was it Thursday? Yes, Thursday. I got called to interpret last minute, and it was like an hour drive to the location because somebody had gotten in an accident. I hadn't had breakfast yet because I had an antibiotic that I have to wait like an hour for and stuff.
Sorry to interrupt. Is this the meetup?
Yes.
Yes.
Quantified stuff?
Yes.
Yes.
You missed all the good parts.
You missed the majority of it. Come on in.
We're now in the Q&A
Yeah,
section.
Q&A. See, John.
And
Any questions?
well, we have enough time. I could probably run through it really fast. And I managed to not eat breakfast that morning, and I had a noon. It was before like 2 o'clock was by the time I was actually getting ready to eat again. But being hyped up and going to interpret and going to the next meeting, I totally had ignored the fact that I was starving and hadn't eaten since like 7 o'clock the previous night. But then when it hit me, I needed to sit in a room by myself and have my snacks because it was not pretty. So, but yeah, just, you know, like we said, just whatever makes you tick, knowing that is going to be a way to create some good hacks for yourself. I know I waste a ton of time on social media and BuzzFeed and Huffington Post, and sometimes I can justify it and say it's for work because I do our social media stuff and post things and whatnot. But a lot of the time I'm like, well, like, I can check my account just for a few minutes, and 2 hours have gone by. So having things like, what was the thing, I don't remember what it's called anymore, but the thing that times out after 10 minutes.
Stay focused.
Stay focused. So I have an extension that after 10 minutes logs me out of Facebook.
Which works fine unless you have to do Facebook for your work.
Right.
In which case you have to bypass that.
Oh.
Right. But, you know, but then but it still helps. It helps to have some of these checks and balances in place to get away from it. And certainly, like, we just came back from Daytona Beach, which was great, but I probably spent like 3 or 4 hours just trying to figure out which flight we were going to take and what we were going to do. And we could have very easily had someone on like Fiverr do all of this planning for us and save me the time. Not only the time, but the stress, the mental energy it takes. And then you're worried, you're like, did I get the best deal? And you probably didn't, but it's okay. But not having to deal with it directly would have been a little bit nicer. Any other questions?
Jerry, you've been using Lyft, which is an app for trying to do good habits. Did you want to share your...
Lyft with an I assume, not a Y, because that's...
not driving.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, driving in a weight
And
loss.
they call it this. It's Lyft, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lyft, I did get
Translates
that.
to Uber.
Yeah.
In German. So sure, I've just been using this app. I think I talked about it last time for folks who weren't here, that just was a way to participate in a quantified diet experiment comparing a lot of different diets. And it takes into account a lot of these things. How can you be socially connected with people? Can you set some objective goals? Can you remind yourself? Can you reflect once or twice a day on this and participate and put little milestones in place? And it's been pretty successful, I think, for me, and it's also interesting to see the results of this diet, which I just posted on our Google Plus Meetup group. So,
What was the
general?
synopsis?
So generally, I'll pull it up real quick. But generally, there was a set of diets that were highly successful, among them slow carb and paleo.
Woo, slow carb.
Oh, okay.
Let me pull it up here. Timed out on the internet here.
It's really good they're doing that because there's so much controversy over those diets, and you see so much and things. It's good that someone's actually
Putting some numbers behind that.
quantifying it. Yeah.
Mainly healthy eating. That's
Mostly
Yeah.
getting rid of
Yeah.
junk.
A lot of it.
Getting rid of junk is a lot of it, yeah.
Processed food.
Getting rid of processed food.
Yeah.
I have a new
Processed
paleo friend, and
junk
so
stuff.
I'm really excited because she orders food the same way I do.
Oh.
She doesn't look at me weird when I order something without a bun.
The internet here is timed out.
And we'll post the link for the presentation too in the Google Plus group, right? Or I
Excuse
can
me?
do that. Post
You
the
can
link.
put it there, and you can
Because
also
I did
put it also
have
on-
references. I did not like totally plagiarize this thing. I promise. I'm probably not as awesome at my referencing as I was like 4 years ago when I was still writing college papers and your degree depended on not plagiarizing. So all the references are there in terms of what I used, including the graphics and things. So when we post that, you're welcome to go through it or just take my word for it. It's easier.
And you can post the link in the Google Plus and
Yes.
in our Meetup as well, since some
Yes,
people aren't
yes.
on the Google Plus, and then I'll be posting the video later, just in case you didn't get to see the whole thing. So.
Were there any questions or comments I missed from the group?
I mean,
Or was it mostly
Some
just,
comments.
what I'll see in the video?
There was some, I've got recorded though, the
Yeah, 'cause
questions and
it-
comments
yeah,
too.
it's
So,
recording, so.
yeah, it's in the video
Oh,
too,
the video
so
is-
yeah.
you can,
Is this question
you can relive the whole thing.
included in the
Yeah, what? Is
Is
this
this question included
Yeah, I think it is. It's in the video right now. So, yeah, a very recursive thing going on here. So,
So another thing I read about, it's just a comment where I don't have a real point. Just maybe someone else will actually throw in some real useful information.
It's question and sharing time.
Yeah. So I'm always more interested in like what is the large organization doing, because they have more resources to figure out how to be uber rational, right? So like you'll read about a company that's trying to spread like the use of toilets in the third world, and they'll figure out like, oh, if we do toilets this way, they don't work. If we do them that way, they don't work. If you do them that way, they don't work. But if we paint them white and make everything in there white, and you see the colors over the room, then you can tell that things are dirty. Then you want to wash your hands after you use it for some reason.
Put the fly in.
Yes, the fly in the urinal. And oh, if only we had something like that in the girls' bathroom, it would be so much fun. I'm all about like gamified things. I'm very competitive.
The women's restrooms are always nicer than the men's restrooms.
That's true, they are. Well, I'm not saying in terms of, I'm just saying in terms of the pleasure of the experience of a restroom. So, speaking of which, I highly recommend Keystone Mall. They have by far the most automated and nicest restrooms.
They do.
So.
I don't know, some of the women's restrooms can be nasty, depending on where you go.
Yeah,
Some
depends
of
on
the
where you
men's
go.
restrooms, you just have to wonder how they got that there.
And how there's not a corpse associated with the
worse
mess.
than the men's, to be honest.
I
I
mean-
worked, did that job on my back.
Tampons,
For a while, it was-
tampons.
yeah, the women's always actually more stuff over it.
Yeah.
I think there's just more women, at least where I was, going in and out of that restroom, so they left more things there. I don't know.
Did you ever get
She
on
did,
the?
Yeah, I do.
she did mention Dan Ariely up there, and he is good for lots more in terms of this living intently or with intention, because we are incredibly irrational, and the more that we're aware of those irrations that we live, and we can be intent on recognizing them and fixing them.
Yeah. Well, I loved one example he gave. They asked people to choose, they could have a half a box of chocolates now, or a full box of chocolates in a week. And people always chose the half box right now. But when they phrased it, you can have a half a box in a year, or a full box in a year and a week, which was the same time difference between the boxes, they chose the year and a week and took the full box because of that perception of time. And we're definitely not rational when it comes to perceptions of time. And I think one of the things that a lot of places have mentioned in terms of creating new habits is be mindful of your time sucks. So like consciously choose to watch TV or be on Facebook or read Huffington Post or BuzzFeed or watch the cute cat videos, but make that choice rather than just that being the thing that you automatically go to. Okay, you got your thing out.
Yeah, so here are after the course of, I think it was about 45 days of measuring these various diets, they ended up with 3 diet plans that ended up with 2.7% loss. That was paleo, slow carb, and DASH, which I don't know much about. Those 3
I
diets.
think that's AHA one for
That's American.
Cardio?
American Heart Association.
Low
It's like low
salt.
sodium and
Whole
Okay,
grains.
yeah, so those 3 diets fared best, 2.7% weight loss. There was a calorie counting came in next at 2.5% weight loss. Whole foods came into 2.3%, gluten-free came at 2.3%, no sweets came at 2.3%, vegetarian came at 1.8%, and mindful eating came at 1.8%, which makes, as I look at the list, thinks this isn't exactly apples to apples. Like gluten-free could well be slow carb and other things as well.
Yeah.
But that's how they categorize the.
And yeah, you can say
diets.
gluten-free, but if you're still getting like the processed
Correct.
gluten-free food,
Correct.
which is not worth it.
So they were different, but
Just,
Yeah.
not
so-
gigantically. I
Yeah.
don't know if they're statistically significant
Well,
compared.
but
So
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
2.8.
it's
2% of someone's weight
Yeah.
versus 1.8%.
1.8 definitely. Yeah, the top 5 though seem pretty close to each other. So
And does that include exercise too, or is this all just people eating and doing everything else the same?
So I think what you will find is some of these diet plans have a component of exercise and some do not. So it's not exactly, they haven't really gone and, down to the granular level, apples and apples. They were just trying to gather up real world experience, sort of a citizen scientist experiment, to try to, actually where this came from, reading more of it, slow carb had been sort of anecdotally or sort of in a, without a control arm, slow carb had been purporting a certain amount of success, and they said, well, gosh, there's all kind of bias in that. What if you compared it to a bunch of these others? And there's probably still bias in here, but maybe you have a little more sense of comparative study. One of the other things on the habit thing, so I've been thinking about this a lot in some conversations with people. So the notion of planning for success, I think, is really, really, really fundamentally important. I think people, there's speaking in extremes, people sometimes can plan to prevent failure, and that takes all of your energy. You can devote, if you have 3 units of energy and you spend 2 of them to preventing failure, you really have a lot to go to succeed. So the notion of really being positive and focusing on success is important. And I think some people, particularly those who are security-minded, who really want to sort of make sure nothing bad happens to them, and that's a driver, they'll spend all their investment in planning not to fail. And it's very different to plan for success than plan not to fail.
But there was actually one thing I didn't include in the presentation, but Scott Geller, alumni distinguished professor at Virginia Tech and director of the Center for Applied Behavioral Systems in the Department of Psychology. He's got a video, and he talks about, like, he wants you to ask 3 questions of anyone, and this was more like, it was about self-motivation. Can you do it? Will it work? And is it worth it? And it doesn't matter if it's, you know, a 9-year-old kid working on a science project or somebody that you manage at work taking on a new project. And he talked about that. And he, like, in his psychology classes, he asks, like, how many of you here are because you want to, you know, avoid failing this class versus taking the opportunity to learn from this class, and how that mindset really changes things. Because avoiding is going to be the bare minimum effort to survive versus succeeding is going to really challenge you and take that to that next level for your activity. So, very good. Well, that is just about our hour. If there are no more questions.